The past few years have seen a crazy surplus of ARPGs hitting the scene, and some stayed and some flopped. From games like Torchlight Infinite, Superfuse, Diablo 4, Last Epoch, and that list ever is everlasting. It goes on quite forever. There's been plenty of ARPGs that have took center stage upon the years, and I feel like the next challenger to come step on forward and plans to reinvent this entire genre sinks itself into the Mount Rushmore of ARPG Kings. No Rest for the Wicked is an isometric ARPG developed by Moon Studio, the creators of Orii, and as well as published by Private Division. From the innovative combat system that incorporates combos and completely slowing down the gameplay, unlike most RPGs that follow more of a hyper fast way of going through levels, whether that's very fast paced combat or hordes and hordes of enemies. This brings me to the first thing of why No Rest for the Wicked is going to be the best RPG of the year. And let's start with the overall combat. No Rest for the Wicked chooses to go the methodical slow place route, which is found in similar games like the Soulbone series, or even its counterpart, which would be more along the lines of like Path of Exiles. But it goes more into that Soulsborne aspect, pretty much utilizing timing and as well as spacing, as well as a parry system to overcome pretty much any enemy. The style of combat really shakes up the RPG genre, since most of these games that you will play gives you something along the lines of something similar to like a power fantasy, which makes you feel almost like a god while playing, kind of like that Warframe ego, essentially, that you're just this unstoppable being that can tear shreds and shreds and shreds through all forms of enemies. Well, No Rest for the Wicked essentially slows that down and really humbles you as a player. Even the enemies require some form of strategy as they move and act smart, and you can't even spam against them because they will essentially just punish you for as any Soulsborne mob will do to you. The bosses also are just as impactful as the regular enemies, which really gives the same tenacities as you will expect from a game that has similar aspects to Souls-based games. And as well as tackle those beasts and monsters and the mobs and anything like that, you will need to require some good gear, which brings me to how weapons are treated in this game. Each weapon has a different move set essentially to them, so making different builds much more fun to play with, overall adding a sense of randomness to how the game is played, and I'll get to that a little bit later. These different movesets helps you gain an advantage over all the threats that may come your way. And in any ARPG fashion, you will know that there's a variety of different tiers of gear, like commons, uncommons, epic, and legendary weapons. The devs really did work on making common weapons still be relevant. Like if you play any ARPG, or actually just any RPG essentially, the very first beginner weapons aren't always naturally trash. Well, they now want to actually change that way of thinking and letting common weapons still have a relevancy as in later parts of the game with the customization to those common based weapons. Finally, we also have what the devs are calling a soft lock on your classes. Now, as I was watching the little overview, the little video that they dropped, the way they explained it essentially showed that the class systems reminds me of an MMORPG by the name of Albion Online. For some of you that do not know this MMORPG, essentially this MMO way that they handle classes is not like your traditional way. You build your classes through your playthrough. So most games you could choose like, oh, I want to play as a hunter, or I want to play as a tank or rogue or something of that nature, and they have different forms of classes to play as. Well, essentially you technically create and craft your class while playing, and you can kind of mix up the different ways of how your given class, and I'm putting quotations around that, how that actually works in the game itself. So it's not going to be your traditional like, oh, I play as a rogue, or I play as a tank or a mage. No, they really kind of mixify it. Like you can be a hunter slash mage and using some abilities from a rogue. Like you can mix up a lot. So I will actually can't wait for the early access so we can actually go deep, like do a deep dive into how that soft lock actually worked. They briefly explained it in their showcase. But that also brings me to my next point, and another reason why I feel like this game will really be one of the best RPGs of 2024, the exploration. That bit, it was by far one of my favorite things that was showcased during that video. And what makes it different is actually a couple of things. First thing is the interconnected world. The world of the Norse for the Wicked is pretty much handcrafted to every single bit of that world. Everything you're seeing on screen when you're traveling, that was handcrafted. There is no procedurally generated content. So therefore, it's feel like each of these worlds is like really like each of the biomes essentially, or whatever you want to partake in each given area, is handcrafted to a T to really fit the narrative and the vibe that the devs want you to feel. And to help us further explore this world, the game offers very different ways of traversing the world. So like you can climb through vines to get to higher locations to grab more loot. There's like rocks and stuff you can climb on. Like you could really, there's the verticality of the map is also very well. Like I've played a lot of RPGs, and when it comes to those different worlds, they don't really feel truly alive. Like you can sometimes just blitz right through it. Even games like Last Epoch, and I really like Last Epoch and Torchlight Infinite or Superfuse, even Path of Exiles, they all have a specific way of doing things, and it doesn't feel too much like it's truly really alive, essentially, if you're catching what I'm throwing there. But I also want to talk a little bit about the loot system as well. The loot is also heavily randomized, so no players will have the same path of power as the next person, which truly adds an experience to builds when it comes to overall crafting that given build. Essentially, be going back to my earlier point when it comes to the class system and the weapons and the loot, all of that stuff is definitely randomized. So it's not like I can sit there and follow a given guide unless you got like good RNG and really can be able to build upon that. But every class and every player is going to be pretty much a different walking beast, essentially, mowing down through enemies. The visuals as well look dark and grim, and to add really to that hand painting style to the game, it really is a chef's kiss. Essentially, it makes it one of the most visually appealing ARPGs I've seen in quite some time, and I'm almost not too surprised since the devs created a beautiful, stunning side scroller, which is Orii. If you guys actually look at that game, the way the art style of that game just looks phenomenal. But like most ARPGs, there is a hub area as well. You can pretty much rest at it. The place is called the Sacrament, and you find this like once you get off your shipwreck and you're going deeper into the jungle given area, and then you can be able to talk to NPCs. You can shop there. You can upgrade your gear, etc., etc., etc. You can also further improve that town as well, which they're kind of pulling, and I'll get to this later. They're pulling from different genres into this game. You could go out and craft materials. Crafting materials is honestly a banger of a thing. Like I didn't even think like of that when playing other ARPGs. Is essentially like, hey, go out, destroy, come back, loot, destroy, adding a little bit more sense of slowing the player down in this ARPG really will help a lot of players get into ARPGs. I know with some cases, there's ADHD, and we all want to just see that dopamine rush where all of the numbers are hitting the screen and we're doing millions and millions, thousands of thousands, all types of damage across the board. But slowing it down and really adding a sense of urgency and a sense of a threat, like every enemy is a threat to you. And not just as simple as, oh, this enemy is superly high leveled or something on that nature. He has some form of quirk to him or a caveat to that creature. Like, no, this is really going in on that Dark Souls feeling. Like almost every mob can literally tear you to pieces, can literally fuck you up in that sense. And it's like, damn. It's honestly very cool to see the devs really go deep into that. And for my next point, the combat, the exploration of the world, there is quite one last thing that absolutely makes any ARPG quite addicting, which is the overall endgame. As we all know, endgame matters a lot to anybody that's gonna be putting time and time and time into your game, whether they're making different like alt accounts, like different tunes and stuff. The end game is really like key to making an ARPG really like work and the longevity of that ARPG. So Moon Studios thought to make two forms of an end game, in which there's pretty much two given areas. There's one area which, if I remember the saying, like the Meridia ships or something of that nature, I cannot remember the name of it, but it pretty much is a dungeon essentially that can further improve you during the main campaign, like the main story of the game. And the end game is quite literally alive. Like that part, like it's always changing. The world is always reflecting what's happening in the main story. There's always different creatures coming out to attack you, and some of them may be of a higher difficulty of that given creature. Like he may be a little bit more faster than or slower, might got more health, X, Y, and Z. And you can essentially just use that to further better yourself overall. Then there's the Crucible, which it would be the true end game. Now, the devs already said that there is not too much they can go into explanation of what the Crucible is, but essentially the best way I can get the gist of it is like nightmare dungeons. I think there's nightmare dungeons in Diablo 4, or I can't remember exactly what was Torchlight Infinite's, but like their Maelstrom thing, like it's essentially like an area where you are, all your high-end level players are grinding that out at the highest of the high. But they didn't go into too much detail. They're really waiting for early access, so we really have to wait till early access in order to actually be able to try out this Crucible. But one thing you will notice about No Rest for the Wicked is the devs' goal is to take parts of their favorite games, or favorite genres to be exact, and bring it to life, essentially being a overall combination of many different genres. And as you notice throughout this entire video, lots of things were pulling from different genres. Like they're pulling from the Souls genre, they're pulling from ARPGs, they're pulling from roguelikes. Like there's so many, they're even pulling from survival games, right? Like if you play any survival games like Nightingale and Shrouded, The Forest, all those, the crafting and all that stuff, like you don't really see that a lot in ARPGs. And of course, this isn't something that's like super groundbreaking or anything of that nature, but it's just great seeing the innovation that devs are trying to do to really further improve the things that they love. Now, No Rest for the Wicked is dropping into early access on Steam. It's going to be on April 18th. There's already promises of multiplayer as well for the roadmap upon early access and beyond. But if you guys want to discuss more RPGs and indie games, then definitely subscribe to the channel. Your boy's on his way to 1,000 subscribers. And as always, this has been your host, KSDTV, here at Chaotic Inc., signing out. Peace.
I don't sleep, that's so weak, don't plan to rest. I'm from a hood where you die if you don't pack a vest. No culinary degrees, but whipping crack the best. Chefing, hard times taught lessons. Praying every night to pull up in park Benzes. What's my home is what you call trenches. You wouldn't last a day seeing life through all lenses. It's all tension, no sun, and rain and plenty. Full-time job, still can never make a penny. I ain't rapping for clout.